All right, in today's tutorial for question number 4, we are talking about portions. And I'm going to give you a little bit of information before we get started. You can see on your daily review page that this is the biggest question. There's the most parts to this question. So this video is going to be longer, and I really encourage you to use the links in the description below to help you find the specific part that you might need help with for this. But with that information, let's go ahead and get started talking about portions. When we describe portions, we are just talking about numbers, but these are numbers that are not whole numbers. So I'm writing that down now. We're just talking about numbers that aren't whole numbers. And so some examples of numbers that aren't whole numbers might be something like 1/3, or might be something like 4.5 or 3/5, or even 61%. All of those numbers are examples that aren't whole numbers. So even something like 4.5 that includes a whole number in the front, there's a part of a number that's with it. Okay, all of these are what we would describe as portions, or what we describe as part of numbers. They're not a whole number all by itself. So that's what we're describing. And in this example, you can actually see that we have different forms of portions, or different ways that we can represent or that we can show what portions look like. In this class, oftentimes we are going to use what we describe as a portions web to show the connections between these three different forms of portions or part of numbers. In our portions web, we're going to include fractions. We're also going to include decimals, and we will include percents. And again, you can see those in the examples above, like 1/3 is a fraction, or 4.5 is a decimal, or 61% is a percent. So this is an example of a portions web, and it's showing us how our fractions, our decimals, and our percents are all related to each other. Now, understanding how these relate to each other really helps us with our all of the different parts that are in this question number 4 here, because this is asking us to do a lot of different things. So we're actually going to look at how the portion web works and how we can move from one form of a portion, for example, a fraction, to another form of a portion, maybe like a decimal. So I want to see how I could change a fraction to a decimal. So let's go ahead and look at how we might do this. And I'm going to go ahead and change the page just so that we have a little bit more space here, but we're still talking about question number 4 and our portions web. So first, one of the things to recognize is that this triangle, or this portions web, we could really start at any point in this portions web. We could start with the fraction or the decimal or the percent. It doesn't matter. And we'll get some examples with that today. But I'm going to go ahead and start up at the top, the fraction, and I'm going to look at how I might turn any fraction into a decimal. So here I'm going to use an example like 1/2. That's a nice, easy fraction that most of us are familiar with. And with that fraction 1/2, I'm going to look at how I could turn 1/2 into a decimal. Now, some of you might already know what the decimal value of 1/2 is, but understanding how to take any fraction to a decimal is really helpful. So our rules for that is that we're simply going to divide the numerator, and the numerator is our top number, by the denominator, and that's the bottom number of our fraction. So in this case, I could go ahead and look at my fraction, which was 1/2, and I could go 1 divided by 2, and that is going to give me a decimal. Now, for this work, you are more than welcome to use a calculator. You can also practice your long division strategies that are in question 2 as well. but you're more than welcome to use a calculator here. So 1 divided by 2 gave me a decimal of 0.5. Now I've figured out 2 of the 3 parts in my portions web. Let's go ahead and look at how we might take a decimal and turn the decimal into a percent. Well, we're simply going to multiply whatever our decimal value is by 100. And in this case, that would have been 0.5 times 100, and that would give us 50%. So now we have all 3 forms of our portion web, but we also want to make sure that we connect how we could turn a percent into a fraction as well. And so we can go ahead and look at the rules for that. Our percent is always written over 100, and then we're going to simplify if we can. So in this case, we would have 50 over 100, and we could simplify that by dividing both 50 and 100 by 50, and that would give us 1/2. And so you can see that we're back to that original fraction that we had. Now, a moment ago, I described and I told you that you can start anywhere. So if I started with a decimal, I could have found the percent and then found the fraction. Or if I started with the percent, I could have found the fraction and then I could have found the decimal. The other thing for you to know is that the way that this works is you can actually go both directions on this portion web. So you can actually go from a percent to a decimal or a decimal to a fraction. You can go backwards. I'm not going to show us how to do that in this video, but you are more than welcome to explore that on your own. Or if you already know how to do that, you're welcome to do that. Okay. Let's go ahead now and look at how we might apply this to question number 4 and some of the questions that are being asked of us. So here's an example of what we might see on question number 4. We might be given 3 different numbers. Here I have one that's a decimal, I have one that's a fraction, and I have one that is a percent. And you can see that I made a little chart, and that little chart is going to help me keep track of the fraction, the decimal, and the percent value for each one of those 3 numbers. Remember that a portion can be written as any of those forms, and so what we're going to do is we're going to find the values of all of those things. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my portions web back here with my rules so that I can remind myself of what we're supposed to be doing on this portion web. Now, I was given 0.44 as a value. That was my first value, so I'm just going to go ahead and start with 0.44. That was a decimal, and we've described you can start anywhere on the portions web, so it doesn't matter that it's not the top. And I'm simply going to take my decimal and I'm going to turn that into a percent. I do that by multiplying by 100, so 0.44 times 100 is equal to 44%. All I have to do is put a percent sign at the end, and I've got that as a percent. So now in my little table on the right-hand side, I'm going to go ahead and write down 44%. So I know that 0.44 is equal to 44%, and now I need to find that as a fraction. I'm going to follow my rules, which said I'm going to write my percent over 100, and then I'm going to simplify if I can. So in this case, I have 44 was the percent over 100, and I want to simplify. So in order to simplify, I'm looking for a number that I can divide both the top and the bottom by. In this case, I can divide both the top and the bottom by 4. And that's going to give me my simplified fraction of 11/25. 44 divided by 4 equals 11, and 100 divided by 4 equals 25. So I have my fractional value of 0.44, which is 11/25. And so I'm going to go ahead and write that in my portions web and also in my little chart on the left-hand side there. Now, I've got one value, but now I have a fractional value that I don't know the decimal and I don't know the percent. So I'm going to come back to my portions web and I'm just going to go ahead and clear some of that information out. And this time I'm going to start with my fraction at the top, 4/10. I can take any fraction and I can turn that into a decimal by dividing the top number by the bottom number. 4 divided by 10 would give me 0.4, and I can fill that out in my table. I'm going to move on to my next part and turn a decimal into a percent. I'm going to do that by multiplying by 100. 0.4 times 100 is equal to 40, and I just need to write my percent sign there. That's 40%. I was already given the fractional value here, and so I could write that out as a fraction, 40 over 100. I could simplify that, and this fraction actually simplifies down to 2/5, but it was given to us as 4/10. So we're just going to leave it as that example. And we also have 43% that we need to turn into a fraction and into a decimal. So again, I'm just going to clear out those values. I'm going to start by writing 43% in my percent spot, and I'm going to go now up to a fraction. So I can turn any percent into a fraction by writing that percent over 100 and then simplify if possible. In this case, there are no numbers that I can divide 43 and 100 by. I need a number that I can divide them both by, but there are no numbers that I can divide both of those numbers by. So in this case, we are already at our simplest form, and so I'm going to write that fraction down, 43 over 100, and I'll record that in my table as well. And that means I've got one more step to do. I need to turn that into a decimal. We know we're going to do that by going 43 divided by 100, and that is going to give us 0.43 as a percent. As a decimal. Now, the last thing here really quickly just to note is, remember I said that you can go both directions. I can take a percent and I can turn that into a decimal, and we have to kind of work backwards. In this case, we actually saw this because my rule for that would be to divide by 100. Again, I'm not going to write all of the steps down how to go the other direction in this portions web, but know that you can do that, and again, you're welcome to look that up or ask for some help if you need to. Now, that is how to change fractions to decimals to percents. Once you have that information, now you can start to work with this information for question number 4. So I'm going to take my table that's over on the left, and I'm going to just move that and then bring back up question number 4 here so that we can take a look at what we're actually supposed to do. Well, we were asked to convert all of our numbers to fractions. We've already done that using our portions web, and those are recorded in our table. So I can go ahead and write those 3 fractions down. I have 11/25, I have 4/10, and I have 43 100ths. Now I'm asked to order those fractions from least to greatest, and I don't know about you, but to me, it's really hard to make comparisons with those fractions. But this is one of the places where using our portions web is really helpful. Because if I look at the percentages in the right side of my table, I can really easily see that the smallest value was 40%, which was 4/10. The next smallest value, or my middle value, was 43 over 100. And my final value was 11/25. So using those percentages or the decimals will often make that a lot simpler to put those in order. We've also already converted all of our numbers to decimals, so I can include those decimals there. We were then asked to shade in what was there, and so in this case, I've shown what that might look like. I'm shading in 44 out of 100. I'm shading in 40 out of 100, or you can also think about it as 410 strips, and then I shaded 43 out of 100 in my blocks. Again, we were asked to convert everything to percentages. We've already done that work in our portions web. That's pretty simple to turn that into our percentages, so I can just record those percentages down. Now, our next step can sometimes be a little bit tricky. We were asked to round to the nearest whole number. So I'm going to do a quick lesson on how to round. And what I've got here is the ones value. I know that kind of looks like a 0. And the decimal and the tenths place value. So these are place values, and I'm using letters to stand for those place values. So the ones place value is always the value that's directly to the left of the decimal, and the tenths place value is always directly to the right of the decimal. In this case, I'm asked to round to the nearest whole number, so that means I'm always going to be rounding to my ones place value. In this case, I'm going to underline that. When I underline, I'm going to look at the place value behind that. If that is 5 or higher, that means my ones place value goes up, or if it is 4 or lower, that means that my ones place value does not change. It stays exactly the same. And so that will tell me. In this case, this isn't the greatest example for rounding because all of these are going to round to 0 as my nearest whole number because they all have 4s in that place. And so they're not going to go. And let me go back one step here. Finally, we were asked to label on the appropriate number line. I have one number line that includes tenths. I have one number line that includes ones, and I have one number line that includes tens. This is all just practice with our place value. In this case, we're going to use the tenths, and this is not going to always be perfectly exact. In this case, you're going to see that 0.4 is there, and then I'm going to have 0.3 next. 0.43 next and 0.44 after that. And so I've labeled all of those numbers, and on your paper you might want to write those actual decimal values down. I don't have space for that here on this video. So I know that question 4 has a lot of information in it. There's a lot of things, but this is such an important part of what we do as 6th grade students. That's why there is so much stuff in question number 4. So come back to this video anytime that you might need help with any of the things that are here on question 4. And I am so proud of you guys for checking these tutorial videos out for some help.